Hello, and welcome to another World of UX podcast. This is your host, Darren Hood. Thanks for taking the time to join us on today. A special welcome, as always, to those of you that are tuning in for the first time. Today, we're going to share the conclusion of my Talkin' Shop episode with Strat Parrott. And Strat is the Vice President of CX and UX and the Design Director for a banking institution here in the United States. He has great insights. I met him at one of Tony Mora's this little ad hoc meetups that he has on a regular basis that are really great. It's great to interact with people and meet UXers, find out about people's passions and travels. That's where I met Strat, and you recognize what he brought to the table. He always had great things to share, and I hope and trust that people are enjoying what he's shared already in the first part of this discussion. Let's go ahead and dive in now to the conclusion of this conversation. Enjoy.
That's kind of sales 101 is understand what your customer needs and what their value is so that you can sell them something. There's that old Wolf of Wall Street sales thing, sell me this pen. New people will literally try and sell you the pen. Buy this pen, it writes so nice, it's so pretty, the weight is so good, it feels fantastic. But the experienced salesperson will solve a need for the customer. And so some customer experience teams pull out that way. And there's 5 or 6 other variations of how a CX group can come in. But ultimately, it's really looking across that holistic end-to-end experience for a client and how you would actually build that into your overall strategy and then pull that down into your user experience, whether that be a digital user experience or a physical user experience. My approach has always been to take it as something that's a whole. And really for my 20 years, I've almost never worked in a purely digital product driven company. I've almost always worked in hospitality, retail, finance and banking, insurance, somewhere where you have real people talking with real customers. And oftentimes in a physical location, be that an office building, a storefront, a banking center, or something of that nature. And all of those things have different pieces that allow you to pull through the different levels of strategy from the single sales interaction to the digital interaction or engagement that's happening from the marketing funnel all the way down through just how a person makes a decision once they're on a page and back up, right? So those two things also quite often fall into this idea of operational improvement, process improvement, and those things all combined together are going to get us into service design. Now, in the US, those of us in the US, service design doesn't exist in many places. We've got it a little bit on the East Coast and in the Northeast, and a little bit on the West Coast. But a lot of your middle America and even larger institutions don't have service design jobs or service design functions. They're reliant upon different flavors or labeling of user experience practitioners or product managers or whatever mislabeled thing to use these same tools and methodologies to help them basically combine 3 things: the customer's experience and touch points, the business's touch points with that customer, and then the business's processes and delivery options and how those all work in tandem to deliver whatever it is that they're trying to deliver, be that an experience or a product or a service.
I love the fact that, and I'll segue in this way, I think I love it because what you just described, because it gives a more holistic aspect of what's happening with experience design, as some people like to say. And I remember reading something once where folks tried to, when we started moving toward calling it UX, as that evolved, people were trying to refer to it as experience design in the mid to late 90s, and it didn't catch on for some reason. It didn't catch on, and then everybody was either called an information architect for the next decade or an interaction designer. They just didn't know what to call us. And I remember one of the first books I ever bought was Nathan Shetroff's Experience Design book, and he was talking about all the stuff that we know and practice. Those of us that do refer to ourselves as UXers in some way, form, or fashion, whatever the title might be. I love the fact I had a long conversation once with somebody about how that we should be called experienced designers, just because, and I know some people don't like the word design, and I won't get into that. I just like the fact that whatever nomenclature people arrive at, I just love the fact what you mentioned in your description is that it's very holistic. It talks about more things than just, I mean, there's no way in the world to confuse what you just said with UI. It's my biggest thing.
I identify with the whole experience design or experience architect label. Like, I like that label. I think that it fits best with my skill set. However, it doesn't fit with everybody's skill set.
No, it doesn't.
But where mine becomes unique is that, and I think it plays really well into this experiential piece, is that several of the projects that I've worked on over the last 20 years, some of them that have existed for the last 10 years in Japan, that are physical installations that haven't had the need to be updated in content, material, or technology in 10 plus years. I think that's a big deal. That comes from some foresight and thought into how customers experience these things. It comes from some foresight and thought and planning into what types of things and materiality holds up in a physical environment with something people are going to touch. It requires some strategic insight into what is leading edge enough that it will still be around or still be interesting. So a lot of the focus on my early work was built around different types of touch-enabled devices that worked with projection mapping. Well, you can always upgrade a projector. Projection mapping is huge these days, from companies like TeamLab that do these giant, immersive, cool installations, which we used to do also 15 years ago. But pulling that down into, like, how do you make a physical object trigger a MIDI controller to play an animation? Well, that always looks really cool, and doesn't particularly look outdated if you choose the right look and feel. So, one of the installations that we did once upon a time that is still around, meets all of those criteria, exists in a small folklore museum in rural Japan. It's about a 6-foot wide table. You'll find it on my website, Strat Parrott.com. It is in the Tonomonogatari Museum. We used and worked with a local artist to develop and cast these little figurines that represent different folk tales and different stories. We attached those physically to the table, ran a little wire off of them, made them basically a capacitive touch sensor, just like those old lights from the 80s and 90s where you like tap them and they turn off and on. And that triggers a shadow puppet play on the desktop from a projector mounted up in the roof of the building. Well, it's never had to be updated, like, other than some bulbs changed out. The whole problem we were solving there was being able to put a storytelling device in that helped people understand the gist of a story without language. So the whole museum itself was a collection of oral histories. Those oral histories are in a dialect of that region of Japan, which I always kind of equate to being very similar to Creole. So even native Japanese speakers sometimes have difficulty with some of the complex language or dialect that's happening in this conversation. And so they wanted a way to be able to kind of bring forth some of those stories in a way that transcended the barrier of language.
Wow.
And we did that. We did that through animation, through tactile touch, and through using materials and materiality that were also local to the region. So a lot of people, if you're familiar with Japanese culture, you've seen these little teapots with the knobs all over them. Those are called nambuteki pots. They're basically just cast iron pots. Well, we used that same method to cast all of those little statues. They're all in cast iron. And that area, that region of the country is known for that style and for the different types of folklore. So we were able to tie all of these things together into the larger story. And not only that, like I either built them, like I physically built the table with other craftspeople.
Wow.
My family's background and history is in carpentry. So I could probably claim master carpenter. I can build cabinets and furniture and all of these things. As we built out a lot of the tooling and things that we had for our experiential design company, I would get in there and build things with my hands. So I can build it with my hands. I can design the interface that's going on it. I can establish and pull through the story or interpretive nature or interpretation of a story. Because a lot of the work that you do in the museum space is interpretive. So you're working with a curator, you're working with a museum interpreter to tell a story about an artifact, an object, or an idea, and bring it into something that is real and understandable.
Wow, that's amazing stuff.
And that's why I feel like experiential or experience design is me, not just user experience, because I feel like that's it really, while the methods and the tools are foundationally the same across many of the disciplines, I think that's why people get confused. It's the levels in which you're looking, right? So at its very base, user experience is going to be the most one-to-one in many cases. Is how you're looking at it. You're designing for the one-to-one to meet a one-to-many aspect. Then if you move over to service design, you're looking at two different levels. You're looking at a business level and then the general like human experience, customer user level of things. You can pull that apart to different ways, but ultimately you're using the same tools and methodologies. Right. Like it's the same practice, but it's a different point of view and a different perspective. And I think that's the challenge that we as leaders have faced in how we've got to pull it through to our business partners, our stakeholders, our just the greater industry at large. It's too nearsighted or too short-sighted to say, even as a huge proponent of UX, like that UX is just one thing. However, all of that said, it is still very specific and different from UI design and has been very much conflated. Now, that does not mean that you do not have a UI designer that should understand UX.
Exactly.
But, and maybe that makes them a UI/UX designer or a UX/UI designer. But like, I think the question is the semantics of the slash. Like, what does the slash mean to different people? And how does it add to the confusion of all of it? Because I'm not a UX, UI, service design, CX, experiential, physical designer architect, like slash, 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 slash. I could put all those words in there because those are all different ways in which my work would be described.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go and look at the public portfolio that I have, which really isn't a portfolio these days. I mean, I haven't maintained one in a long time. I have works that I'm proud of that if you looked at, say, that Tono Monogatari museum experience that I just designed, and it was applied to a UX leadership position, the people viewing that are not going to put together that all of that is an interface and all of that is a user interface.
Yep.
From the whole room setup to the physical touch things that are there and how that relates. Like, why do I need to show pictures of a mobile app or a website to get across that I understand in a very high level, very complex, detailed level how user interfaces should happen and how they should work and how experiences should work. It's just really challenging. And I think that we see that a lot today in people trying to figure out how to best build their portfolios, build their case studies. It's going to be different for everybody that's looking at it. And it doesn't matter if, Johnny Ives put forth his portfolio to get a job for someone, they're going to, dismiss him. Like if you stripped away the name and you just showed some of the work, even if it was he's showing a picture of an iPhone, and they're just going to dismiss it and be like, nope, he's only good at industrial design, so he can't design other things or lead a team of designers. And that's just ridiculous.
Yep.
Like I would put money. I don't know how much money I would put on it. I would put all of my money that if you took his portfolio and ambiguousized it, people would just go I don't really know if this guy really actually worked for Apple. There's a lot of Apple stuff here, but let's not believe it. So I don't even know what all of that is to say is that I identify with experience design. I think that it's probably one of the better classifiers, but you're still not going to have entry-level people that come in as an experienced designer. That's something that they would aspire to. I almost feel like experienced design really is experienced architect level, because you've got to know how to manifest and utilize the tools across different media and different points of view.
Yep.
And if you only come from one point of view, you can't work across multiple if you only have the one.
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
And a lot of times the work we're doing in UX, even if we're putting forth the user's experience or a customer's experience, depending on whatever level, we're not interjecting our individual point of view. We're pulling together other points of view to communicate those as a strategic tool to make decisions about how we're going to prioritize something. Do we fix this thing or leave it? What is the cost of leaving it versus the cost of fixing it or improving it? And how much will it move the needle forward on things like satisfaction for all clients? How do we identify our ideal customer profile or our ideal user profile? And what does that look like? Because if we're just designing for one persona, it may be analogous or a proxy to a larger segment. And that's how you have to build your perspective and build that point of view, is that if we can solve this problem or these jobs for this one person, it should solve the problems for many people.
Yes. Yep, exactly. Very well described. Love that. We're going to go into our home stretch with our last at-large topic. And we talked about, there was one of the things we talked about as we were warming up, and I know you have a lot of fantastic things to say on this as well, but just speak at large about the state of UX. What are your thoughts on the state of UX today?
So, in my opinion, the state of UX is in an upheaval. I believe that while we are in a near term, very challenging time, that long term, I believe it's brighter. We're in a transitional period today.
Mm-hmm.
That transitional period is going to be wrought with pain. However, I believe that those of us who've been in the industry at different levels, whether it's UX, or design or graphic design or anything like that, we've seen this ebb and flow, right? Like, so it used to be that once every 3 to 7 years, there'd be a big push for all of these corporations to hire in-house. They build big design teams. The design teams would exist for 3 or 7 years. And then after that time, they dump most of the team. You'd have all of these new agencies start up. The agency kind of world would have a little boom for a span of time. And then the cycle would start again. I believe we're seeing that again, but there's also kind of this breakup in the agency world, right? So most people are keeping their own personal, not self-interest, but their own personal health, their own well-being. They're taking it under their own control, and they're just freelancing. So they have the ability to control the experience or the narrative or the projects that they work on, right? So it's not just working on projects that are free in building their portfolio and experience, but they have the ability to now work on projects that are things that meet their values and meet their needs that they might not be able to do in an agency environment or in a corporate environment. So I think that transitional period is really going to be about UX and UXers learning how to engage and embrace the best way to, I don't know the best way to say the best way to do what, to really engage with the best way to bring their whole experience and keep that mindset that they should always be learning, and keeping that beginner mindset. Like, I kind of want to take it back to where I started, I think, is that, the idea of Shoshin. I spoke a lot about Japanese things, but this idea and concept of the beginner's mind, to really approach any subject with an open attitude, without your preconceptions. I think we've got to remember that that's also kind of a base of this type of design work that we do. We have a bunch of tools. We have the methodologies. We have established practice and processes. But you have to approach each problem, even this UX problem that we have today, as a beginner. So, like, what are some of these things that could be good about it? Sure, AI is disruptive, but computers were disruptive too. Excel itself was disruptive at one time. It was going to do away with all kinds of salespeople and sales jobs. Little did they know it actually made more work for them. Now, to the state of UX, it's interesting. It's oversaturated right now, especially with some of these learning tools, boot camps, things like that. Promises that have not been delivered to our juniors, our career and skills transitioners that are trying to move into or want to become UXers at different levels. They're not being met with what they were being sold. I would be interested to see if anybody's done any research to see how much of that has happened with overseas influence versus maybe a US centric or even UK centered influence, because I've noticed that while there are US based, Canada based, UK based boot camps, that a lot of the folks who are attending these, who are coming out in droves or in big groups, are from other countries with various different things that happen, right? So they're coming out of lower socioeconomic environments. They're looking towards this silver bullet of UX that has touted, 6-figure jobs, easy to get, take a boot camp, get a 6-figure job. But they're neglecting so much in that. And that's caused some of this issue. Now in graphic design in the 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, you saw a different thing happen. So there was a large number of graduating graphic designers that were coming out of schools and of, I guess they were really just workshops. They weren't boot camps. They were certification programs, things like that. There were other types of schools. They don't exist anymore, but portfolio schools. So they were usually like a 2-year. There were some really great programs, Creative Circus, Portfolio Center. Those were 2 here in Atlanta that were incredible. But they would produce people for really one of 2 tracks, art directors or production design. And when I say production designers, I don't mean production designers on the set of a movie. I mean, just people to like do the layout functions and not really making any creative decisions, just doing the stuff. But the industry at that time was flooded too. So it was hard and challenging to find a job.
Okay.
That is also kind of an early stage of where different labels started to come out. So you had graphic designers, you had art directors and creative directors, which were pretty normal like that. But then they started breaking things out into different disciplines or silos or what have you. And especially with the proliferation and growth into the internet with internet companies and .com boom and the iPhone being created and the app store. And now we've got apps. So people started trying to differentiate themselves with labels, not really with practice. And so you saw people start going towards the biggest, shiniest object. That at the time, kind of as you say, was this idea of user experience, which, like even still after 20 years, Darren, like I will identify with people now who understand or feel like they understand what user experience is or means. But like, I've never held a job that called me a UX anything.
Yeah.
Because they didn't exist really at any time.
Right.
Like it didn't exist. That wasn't a thing. It was a job we did, not a title we had. I think now you've just got so much saturation out there. It's going to be a different type of differentiator, right? It's not those who can use a tool or not use a tool, who's the best at Figma and makes the best screens. That'll be some group of people. What it will be eventually is those who are able to communicate with the business side of the team, establish strategy in a way using design methods, but not necessarily having to talk about them. So like, if you've been in the game long enough or been around business, like an MBA has its own methods and practices. And you know what? Like some of those are actually design methods and practices. They just have a different label. And that's okay. But it is a dichotomy of creative problem solving and, problem solutioning is really kind of the crux there. Yeah. So I think there's just going to be a lot of opportunity. We just may see it as something different it'll definitely be something different than it is today. Will it still be called UX in 5 years? Will it still be called UX in 10 years? I'm not sure. Like, I think it may get back to being a function of a broader job. Like we will go back to performing a UX function, but not necessarily being a UX only function.
Right. It makes sense.
And it might make the most sense, right? Like,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you know, you're learning audio production and maybe video production doing your side hustle or side gig, but you can carry that into other projects or work. Even if you're not the one doing the video editing or the audio editing, now you can talk to them. So now you can take a
yeah.
UX mindset, function, tools, and skills that you have, and like you can go work on a movie production. You can go look at industry adjacent things. You can work in marketing. You don't have to stay in technology. Like there's just all of this opportunity in how you can look at the jobs and the job market, which is really everybody's focusing on UX being problematic because of the job market. But I think it's more than that. Like that's the problem. But the root cause is this disambiguation or this ambiguation of what it is that happens. And I mean, it's not just us. Product managers are seeing it slowly. CX has it as well. I mean, Forrester just reported like one of the lowest upticks in CX.
Yeah, I saw that.
But like it also appears that it may correlate with some of the layoffs, like, and the experiences, like people are more willing to put up, like immediately after COVID, people were willing to put up with worse experiences than they were a year and a half after COVID. So, and then you look at pre-COVID, like people wouldn't put up with a bad experience. So it's just levels of expectation have changed over time. And it may not be that we really get a clear measure on that for a few more years. Like it may be too soon to tell. Sometimes the data is too soon to inform a decision.
That is true. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, I want to know now. Like I want to know today. But like it may be another 3 years or longer.
Yeah.
And to that point, thinking about any kind of change that happens, it always takes longer than you think it will. I heard a great anecdote about a company we're all familiar with. They sling chicken every day except for on Sundays. And it's their pleasure to do business. Well, someone was asked, how long did it take them to operationalize to their frontline associates, changing the culture when someone says thank you to saying my pleasure instead of something else like no problem or whatever. How long do you think it took this chicken company to operationalize that? And maybe you've already heard this, so maybe you know the answer.
I haven't heard that story. No.
Okay. So the two people in the interview, like we're doing right now, the one guy says, it took, I guess maybe it took about a year and a half. It took 6 years.
Not surprised to hear that.
Chick-fil-A, if nobody has figured that out yet, but Chick-fil-A, it took them 6 years to operationalize to the front lines. Something that sounds as simple as saying, we want everyone to respond to thank you or you're welcome or whatever with my pleasure. Took a lot longer than people would perceive it. Now, is that how long it should have taken? I don't know. But most people can agree that whether you like the brand or don't like the brand, that their operational structure is like on point. Like they've got it down. They can slam some people through a drive-through better than almost anybody on the planet.
Yes. Yes, they can.
So, and with a smile on their face and happy, young people and, paying for their college tuition and giving them some great sales training and, whatever, if you've never worked there, you don't even know what other kind of benefits there may be. You've only got the outside. But I just think that like, it's too soon to tell.
Yes.
But it feels painful right now. It hurts. Like I am happy and lucky to have a position right now and a job where I will hopefully soon also be looking for some other people to hire in at various levels.
Yeah.
And that's a treat. like that's a privilege to be able to have, because not
Mm-hmm.
all places are hiring these days. It's also a privilege to hold a job doing the thing that I love in a strategic position,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to hopefully build the value and the discipline up inside an organization that would, or an industry that, depending on the level, kind of dismisses design as a thing.
Yes. Yes. Strat, this is so enriching. I mean, my cup is full. Listening to you elaborate on these things, and just thank you again for taking the time to come on the show. I know people are going to love this, and I know I'm going to get a ton of feedback. And even those, for those of you out there, we've rebranded the UX Chit Chat Hour to the Kaizen UX Rendezvous, and I know some people even on the who come to that, because you've been there before, have not had an opportunity to hear you speak at this length. I know people are just gonna love this. So just thank you ever so much. You said some great things, that some phenomenal food for thought that I know is going to definitely sharpen my saw. You definitely sharpen my saw tonight. So I appreciate this greatly. And this is the kind of stuff I love. I love doing this, even just for that reason.
Well, thanks for having me on. I mean, I'm
yeah.
always love to have the conversation with you, and with anybody. And thank you for allowing me to speak at length.
Yes.
It's definitely, it's my opinion, but it is from many, many years of various experiences and observations. So I'm always open to other people's input. Maybe people, I'm sure it's the internet, will have those who agree, those who disagree, those who want to fight. And hey, it's all good. It's all good. But yeah, thank you much for having me on. I hope to catch you in one of the new Kaizen hours, and talk again in the future.
Absolutely. And even in closing here, I'm going to say, folks out there, you remind me of one day we were doing some work for a major automobile manufacturer. We'll leave it at that. And we were doing some work. We were redesigning their intranet site. And we had the statement of work. We had all the requirements. And I'm a big Jesse James Garrett 5 planes guy. When I know where we're going, now we can start to build our way, work our way up those planes. And I got all this stuff, and I came out with my first set of recommendations for the direction. And somebody looked at what I said, and they said, "Well, that's your opinion." And it's like, and said, "No, there's opinion, and there's expert opinion." And it's funny, I always tell the story, after 48 rounds of wireframes, and approximately 125 stakeholders, version 48 of the wireframes was almost identical to version 2. We nailed it. We nailed it at version 2.
And you know how often that happens? Somebody should really do a study on it, because I think most designers would tell you, like, somewhere in my first 3 concepts, after a bunch of other work, was like, it was the right answer. Now,
Yep.
clients want to Frankenstein things, and that's all, like anything from a logo to a website, whatever, it'll come back. And the biggest challenge is that if you, the designer, don't know how to pull out of those stakeholders what it is they're trying to articulate,
Yeah.
they often haven't had the same training as us.
Yes.
To be able to articulate it. Now, just like we probably couldn't articulate a business decision back to them without saying, like, something's wrong there. Like, this is just, I don't feel like this is the right business choice. They're going to be like, well, you can't tell me why. Ultimately, like, the number of times it's been like, they couldn't tell me they don't like the color blue because it makes them think of their, high school English teacher who was boring or something. So they hate the color blue, and all you had to do was change the shade or hue, or just change it from blue to green, and that was fine. But yeah, the number of times that it's been nearly identical to one of your first choices. I mean, and that's part of the whole divergent and convergent thinking, if you want to get into it at any anyway. But like I said, man, I can keep talking. I will talk forever. So,
but we love it,
signed
man.
off and kept talking. We signed off and kept talking.
We love it. We absolutely love it, folks. Thanks again, folks. Strat Parrott, everybody. I will make sure to put a link to your site in the description on the show. So those of you listen to the show, you want to go and check out Strat's site and you want to look at that piece that he put in the museum. We'll have the link on the site so you can go out there and take a look at it. Yeah. But folks, that is all the time we have for today. So thanks again to our guests. Thanks to all of you taking the time to listen. Again, we've been more deliberate about this. If you love the show, I hear from people all the time. They love the stuff we're talking about. They love how it's impacted them. Hey, let everybody know. Put those reviews in. Tell people about the show. Goofy stuff goes viral. Good stuff needs to start going viral today too. So help us out. Support some folks out here today. Let's support some real UX stuff. We're here to serve the community. We're here for you. So we hope you appreciate that on today. But until next time, again, that's all the time we have for today. So this is Darren Hood, the host of The World of UX, signing off. And until next time, happy UXing, everybody.